All right, well, we have now entered the long-awaited legal lecture because, it's just so fun. We've held off to this week because we knew that if we gave this to you in the first week of class, everything else would be just terrible. So let's get into this legal lecture and see how quickly we can get through this excitement, okay? So we're going to talk about not politics, that's coming up later. Legal issues. Well, now, why are we worried about legal issues? I mean, seriously, you're going to be nurses, right? Not lawyers, but you need to understand law as how it affects us, because it does affect us. And if you don't understand the law, that's not an excuse. And the best way of being protected is know where the problems can develop. So just some practical advice, real simple bottom line. In any situation, if you're not sure if it's legal or not, ask yourself this question. Would I tell my mom or dad what I'm doing? Seriously. If you wouldn't be willing to tell your mom or dad, chances are you shouldn't be doing it. Does it feel right? Do you feel like you need to maybe glance over your shoulder and just make sure nobody's looking? It's probably wrong. HIPAA. HIPAA is a huge problem. We will be encountering HIPAA problems throughout our careers. What's the best way of not breaking those rules? Keep your mouth shut when you're not supposed to be talking. Do you realize what the penalties are for a HIPAA violation? In general, most of the HIPAA violations are unintentional, accidental, and you will get a slap on the wrist at most. However, if you intentionally break the law, if you release information about, say, a very special athlete who wears number 12 on his uniform, I didn't take care of him, but I'm using him for an example. But if you release that information to the papers or the news, to the media and anywhere, $250,000 fine plus time in prison, and say goodbye to your license. HIPAA's a big deal. So that's part of what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about sources of law, the Nurse Practice Acts, state boards of nursing, licensure, malpractice, and professionalism. These are all aspects of the legal questions that we need to understand because it affects us so greatly. We are going to be professional nurses. We will be held to a different standard than other nurses, than other professionals. Nurses have high standards. So, nurses and the law. Who sets nursing law and what type of law governs nurses? There are, I was going to say five. No, there are 5 types of law. And a nurse can be affected by each type of law. Let's talk about the 5 types because this is important. You will need to understand this very clearly so that you know what you can and can't do, and if you think something needs to be changed, you know where to address it. The first source of law is statutory law. Statutory law is a law set by the government. It could be state, federal, local, but these are laws set in place by the legislature. They're simple laws in that the state legislature can vote them into power, and later on they can be removed in the same manner. Nurse Practice Act is a statutory law. The Nurse Practice Act in Wisconsin is built into the Wisconsin statutes. So think about it. If it's in the Wisconsin statutes, it's statutory law. Same thing with federal statutes. Now there's constitutional law. Constitutional law are the rights, privileges, and responsibilities as set forth in the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. there are a lot of laws that are in that Constitution, but constitutional law trumps statutory law. That is the highest level of law. Administrative laws. These are rules and regulations, not laws, that are set by agencies. We are affected by the state boards of nursing. The State Board of Nursing sets administrative law. These are not statutory laws. They're not constitutional laws. They are rules and regulations that the Board of Nursing sets. So if we want those changed, if we think one of those rules is incorrect, where do we go? How can we change that? Well, we could just have an administrative change. That'd probably be the easiest. We could go to the state representatives and have a statutory law enacted that would reverse that rule. That'd be a little more complex, but it could be done. We could look at it as a constitutional problem. Suppose, for example, the Board of Nursing said that it was okay to forcibly restrain a person against their wishes. That goes against the Constitution. So that would be a constitutional reversal. We won't get into that very often. But it is one of those things that we have to understand. There's two more types of laws. Common law and case law. Now these are laws that are not set by administrative agencies. They're not set by legislative agencies. They're not set by the Constitution. These are laws created in the court system. Case law is when, common law is when a court makes a decision and that decision sets further precedent. An example, let's say a nurse makes a mistake, administers medication that causes some harm. And the nurse goes to court and argues that it's not the nurse's fault, it's the doctor's fault for writing that prescription. Okay? If the judge were to say, you know what, you're right, you aren't to blame, it's the doctor that's to blame, that judge has set a common law decision saying that from that point forward, nurses are not responsible for medication errors, doctors are. That's an example. That is not the way it really is, but that is a common law decision. Case law is a decision made at the Supreme Court, either state or U.S. The prime example is Roe versus Wade. That one decision at the U.S. Supreme Court set case law over abortion statutes. So statutory law in the statutes of a state or federal book, statutory law. Nurse Practice Act is a statutory law. Constitutional law are laws built into the Constitution. Administrative laws are not truly laws, they are rules and regulations set by agencies. Board of Nursing, the DNR, which sets bag limits for fish and hunting seasons. Those are administrative laws, which are rules and regulations. Common law is when a local court or a lower court makes a decision that sets new standards, and case law is when a Supreme Court sets a law for either the whole state or the whole country. Nurses are governed by every type of these laws. The Nurse Practice Act provides most of the guidance to nurses, and the Board of Nursing interprets them and implements those regulations for day-to-day nursing care. So, as nurses, we are governed by statutory law primarily through the Nurse Practice Act and administrative law through our boards of nursing, who sets rules and regulations. I hope that's clear. I hope I covered that completely. If not, don't be afraid to ask me questions, okay? Now, what is the difference? Sorry, I got a little. What's the difference between a criminal and a civil action? Criminal and civil. Well, a criminal action is any act that is harmful to society. And prosecution is by a government agency and a person, group, or corporation. So, criminal act will be State versus Jones, or the U.S. versus the XYZ Corporation. That's a criminal case. And it's based on something that is harmful to society. Murder, drug tampering, fraud, money fraud, insurance fraud. That's all harmful to society, so that's going to be a criminal case. There could be felonies or misdemeanors. Now, a misdemeanor is a lower level law that's being broken. Generally, fines are the penalty, but there could be jail time up to 1 year. A felony is major. A felony is a big violation. Fines and incarceration of more than 1 year. And generally, misdemeanors are jail time. Felonies are prison time. A civil case. Civil action is between two people or a person and a corporation, because corporations are now considered people also. So that would be Jones versus Smith, or the ABC Corporation versus somebody. The concern is not so much harm to society, but financial harm to one or the other. And a single event can actually have both types of cases. And when I say, does anybody know, hands always shoot up right away. The most common, the most well-known situation where one event triggered a criminal complaint and a civil complaint is the O.J. Simpson attempted murder of his girlfriend. Or not attempted, the murder of his girlfriend. He was first tried in a criminal court, was found not guilty. Then he was tried in a civil court and found guilty and ordered to pay millions of dollars in damages. Now, why was he found guilty in civil but not criminal? In a criminal case, when it goes to a jury, it's a jury of 12, and a decision for guilt must be unanimous. Anything else is going to be either not guilty or what's called a hung jury. To be guilty must be unanimous. In a civil case, it must be, I think, 9 out of 12. Sometimes in some states it's just a simple majority. So the standard, the bar of the standard of guilt is lower. Now, Nurse Practice Acts it's the Bible for nurses. The Nurse Practice Act determines the definition of an RN and an LPN. It sets licensure requirements and renewal requirements, educational requirements to get your license and to keep your license. It sets nursing membership rules, defines the scope of practice. It also has disciplinary and appeal rules. So the Nurse Practice Act is big. It will set the tone for everything we do and everything we can do. In Wisconsin, there's educational requirements to get your license, but there is no educational requirement to keep your license. Other states do have continuing ed requirements every year. Personally, I think Wisconsin needs to do that too. Nursing and medicine change so rapidly that if we are not kept up to date, we will fall behind. And that can have problems. So some states do have that continuing ed requirement. Those are states that commonly are not part of the nursing compact. Now, what about the impaired nurse? We talked about that briefly in the previous lecture. what do you do if a nurse is using alcohol or drugs inappropriately? Is it a felony or misdemeanor? Criminal or civil? Let's think about that. A nurse shows up drunk. Is that a criminal act or a civil act? Showing up drunk? Did she commit a crime, or was a crime committed? If they drove there, yes. But if somebody else drove them or they took the bus or whatever, was a crime committed? No, not really. They broke some rules, but not a crime. So if something were to happen, it would be a civil action. If a nurse who was impaired acted in the nursing role and made a mistake, is that a felon? Is that a criminal or civil act? That's probably criminal. Would it be a felony or misdemeanor? Depends on what happened. A misdemeanor, something small, something led to death, felony. So what we're seeing here is how one situation, an impaired nurse, can have many different layers of problems depending on the situation. Life is situationally dependent on almost everything. It's what's going on. So what are some other causes of impaired misuse? Well, narcotics, either legally prescribed or illegally obtained. A person can have a prescription for Vicodin and it's perfectly legal to take. However, if they're impaired, now we're back to having an impaired nurse. What if they had a cold and they took some NyQuil? Impaired. Same problems. Perfectly legal substance. NyQuil is legal to use anywhere. But if it impairs your judgment or abilities, it's a problem. Have you ever seen an impaired nurse? What would you do? I personally don't think I've ever seen an impaired nurse except I've seen nurses who were very tired. These are nurses that work double shifts, 12-hour shifts, and then pick up more time, or true full 2 8-hour shifts consecutive. They're impaired. They truly are. They think they can power through it. Drink another Red Bull. 5-hour energy shot. Yeah, you know what? They don't really do that much. So I've seen impaired nurses. What did I do? I made sure that I was safe. I made sure their patients were safe, but I didn't really do a whole lot. Was I to blame? If something went wrong, yeah, probably would have been. Now there are two organizations that you need to know about. NURSYS and NPDB. NURSYS is NURSYS, one word, and then NPDB. Don't we just love our acronyms and abbreviations? The NURSYS, well, you remember growing up in elementary school and maybe you did something wrong and somebody said, you know, that's going to go on your permanent record and follow you forever? Well, NURSYS is your permanent record that follows you forever. NURSYS is state-run. It provides, it's where your educational data is recorded. It provides licensure verification, and any disciplinary actions or license restrictions are listed here. Also demographic data, age, gender, where you live, where you went to school. That is listed and it can be accessed by anybody that is looking up your information. So if you for some reason do something and have a restriction placed on your license, it's out there and everybody can see it. Well, not everybody. Anybody who needs to see it can see it. NPDB is the same thing except only for nurse practitioners. It's part of the federal law. It's under the Medicare, called the Healthcare Quality Improvement Act. It's designed to document malpractice and interstate licensure concerns. This is a little different than nurses, where nurses is reported by the states and agencies. NPDB uses data collected by malpractice insurance providers. So the only way a nurse practitioner will get listed in there is if they are part of a malpractice insurance claim. So you don't want to be listed in there. Torts. These are civil actions. Now, civil action, is that a crime? No. Civil action is between two people. And there's no jail time involved. There are no penalties of that sort. The only penalty is money, right? Somebody is suing somebody else because the plaintiff is suing the defendant because the plaintiff feels the defendant did something wrong. And the plaintiff wants cash. And we see those attorneys on TV all the time saying, we're going to get you money. Those are all tort cases. Now, there are intentional and unintentional torts. And if you can't figure out the difference between intentional and unintentional, we have a problem. An intentional tort, you did something on purpose. Unintentional, it was an accident. It's that simple. Was it done on purpose? Intentional. Was it an accident? Unintentional. Does anybody know about an intentional tort in medicine or nursing? A few years ago, currently people take Celebrex commonly for arthritis pain. They could also use something, there's a number of medications, but Celebrex is very common. Back about 10 years ago, there was another drug that was really good called Vioxx. Excellent. Did a great job on joint pain for arthritis. Unfortunately, some people died because of Vioxx. Intentional or unintentional? Well, if people just died because of that and Vioxx, the company never knew about it, it'd be unintentional. Unfortunately for Vioxx, the company in their research hid that they knew people could die from it. They voluntarily and intentionally hid information showing that deaths could occur. An intentional tort was instituted and they lost a lot of money. Nursing malpractice. It's an unintentional tort. For there to be malpractice, there's 4 characteristics that must be present. If you only have 3 of the 4, it's not malpractice. Okay? What are the 4? There must be a duty. So there must be a nurse-client relationship. When you're at work, it's presumed that you have a nurse-client relationship. If you are a med-surg nurse working at an Aurora hospital and you are on the job, you have a nurse-client relationship with those nurses. If you are a med-surg nurse and you're visiting your parent at another hospital and something happens, you have no relationship. You just happen to be a nurse on the floor, right? So, must be a duty. There must be a breach in the duty. In other words, the nurse did not meet the accepted standards of care. You know, the 5 rights. If they gave the wrong medication, they breached their duty because they didn't check the 5 rights. If the person was supposed to be up with assist of 2, and it was this time the nurse said, I can do it by myself, and they get the patient up and the patient falls, they breached their duty. They did not meet the accepted standards. Now this is an important one. The breach must have a foreseeable cause of the injury. Right? So, again, nurse goes in, patient is an assist of 2. He or she helps the person to their feet alone, Patient falls, they're responsible. If they get the person up on their own, person walks to the bathroom, uses the bathroom, walks back to bed, gets back in bed, and later on claims that their back got hurt because they got up with only one person. I don't know if there's a foreseeable cause of that injury because of that breach. Maybe, maybe not. Questionable. But the most important and the bottom line characteristic that must be present is there must be damage of some sort. Nurse goes in, takes care of their patient. Patient is assistive two, only one person, walks to the bathroom, walks back, gets back in bed, says, only one person got me up, so they breached their duty because they didn't meet the standard. If the patient wasn't hurt, there is no malpractice. So, nursing malpractice. You must have a duty there must be a nurse-client relationship, so you have duty. You must breach your duty. So in other words, you didn't meet the accepted standards. The breach must be a foreseeable cause of the injury. And damage must have happened. Now, damage can be physical, mental, emotional, or financial. But the damage must have happened. According to the Center for Nursing Advocacy, in 2004, there were 2.9 million nurses. 2.9 million nurses. But of that, there's only 1 in 2,200 nurses that had a malpractice. There was 1,256 a year, 4 per day. But only 1 in 2,200 nurses actually committed a malpractice. Now, that could be a terrible number or a minor number, depending on how you look at it. It's terrible if you're the one that made the mistake, or you're the patient that the nurse made the mistake on. That's a big number. But the reality is, you can work for 2,200 days, or you'd have to work for 2,200 days before you make a malpractice, have a case of malpractice. If you look at the odds, that's 10 years, 8 years of work. I've been a nurse for 18 years, and I've never had a malpractice claim against me. So, elements of malpractice: there needs to be professional duty. The plaintiff needs to prove the claim. You, as the nurse, do not have to prove that you were right. They have to prove you were wrong. The plaintiff needs to prove that there's a nurse-client relationship. The Nurse Practice Act determines the scope of practice. And if you act within your scope of practice, that is the basic requirement of any nurse. So you provide good cares, you provide timely cares, you provide medication, you do the 5 rights. That's all within the scope of practice. If you decide to start an IV on your own or administer medications without an order, you're acting beyond your scope of practice, and you're opening yourself up to malpractice. Would you ever render assistance to a person who collapses in public? Think about it. You're at the mall, and all of a sudden somebody grabs their chest and falls. You're going to help them? You can. There is that Good Samaritan statute. Immunity is granted, but only as long as you are attempting reasonable actions. I saw a motor vehicle collision. I stopped and I helped pull a person out of the wreckage. I began CPR. They were never revived. I am trained in CPR. So what I did was within my scope of practice. I did the best I could in that situation. Nothing happened to me. What if the person, what if that person who in the car accident had a bad throat injury? Could I perform a tracheostomy? Could I? Well, could I? Sure, I could. I know how to do it. Am I allowed to do it? No. So while I can do it, I won't do it because it's not within my scope of practice. Could I do a thoracotomy and perform open chest compression? Well, technically, I know how it's done. I've seen it done, but I'm not going to do it. If I did that, I'd be opening myself up to malpractice. It's beyond my scope of practice. It's not a reasonable action. We're at about a half hour right now, so let's stop and pause. I'm gonna stop the ending and stop taping right now. Come back with part B right away. Okay, this makes them a little bit shorter. Okay.